Thank you, Yankee, for being here. And we are now about to hear the second talk by Professor Negroponte. And the next talk is Beyond Digital.
Yeah, just for 2 minutes. No, just the remote control. Okay, good. No introduction is. Oh, great. Oh, I desperately need it. Okay. Is that the only one, or I mean, do I have to, or can I keep one? You know, I can.
It's a new one.
No, but when this one's empty, I can grab. Oh, I saw that one. So I didn't. See, perfect. Thank you. Can I start right in?
Well, I think you heard and you read in the summaries that we sent home to you that Nicolas Negroponte is highly involved in high tech on the one side, but also in social entrepreneurship, such as so many of us here. And Nicolas will now tell us something about bringing entrepreneurship to the social periphery.
Perfect. No, I want to deviate for 2 seconds because I've invested in 60 companies. I've reviewed about 5,000. And I think the one thing you should never do is take a convertible note. And I think there's a very important reason not to do it. Yes, come on. Come on up. And I'll still stick to the 30 minutes. And here's my reason. And I'd love to hear your answer. When you give somebody a convertible note, now I'm the angel, suddenly that puts me on the opposite side of the table when it comes time to convert, because it's in my interest that you convert low, so I have a larger percentage of the company. If you convert high, that often can be because I have helped you. I've introduced you to all of these rich and famous people. I have gotten you market share. I have advertised for you. And what happens? You convert high, and I get a small discount. So I think convertible notes separate the entrepreneur from the angel in a very fundamental way. What do you say?
Well, I think that I started by saying if somebody is stupid enough to give you a convertible loan, you should take them. And I'll mention that, and I'll explain it again.
Yeah, if you should take them, if you're the start.
No, the thing is that, well, you're talking about, the question is how much an angel that put money in the company, how much control he has, actually, and the valuation that the company has. If you expect that the angel actually is going to build your business for you and going to help you, you're probably doing something wrong. Yeah. If you expect that the angel will determine the valuation, your contract and everything that you sign on is completely wrong. When you build a company, especially in the first phase, it should be very easy to maintain control. Now, I'm not trying to say that, you know, of course there is some kind of a conflict of interest, but I rarely found people to say that people will actually go around and say, oh my God, I invested in this fantastic business. It's usually not that way that what happened. And in terms of the economy of it, okay, you know, if you start to raise money and then a year later it was 4 times or 5 times, and somebody made that deal, then you made an excellent deal. Okay, my belief again is that I would avoid it, and the reason that I would avoid it is because I think it's not a fair mechanism, mostly to my investor, and even that investors are grown up and smart people, a lot of them, and I want my investors to be successful. And so I would avoid that because, and this is exactly what you mentioned, right? It's a terrible tool for the investor. It's a really good tool for the entrepreneur.
Well,
Assuming that control is completely with the hands of the entrepreneur. It becomes a terrible tool for the investor. Sorry.
Yes. No, okay. Rush off.
Of interest.
Yeah. Also, always remember, incrementalism is the enemy of creativity. That's...
I said it, right?
No, you said the opposite. You said be incremental.
Be incremental, but remember that if you do that, you're not going to have ripple effects.
Okay. At any rate. Thank you, by the way. So, and I'll stick to the clock anyway. What I thought I would do, and I can change a little bit if there's audience demand, is describe sort of after spending 25 years building and running the Media Lab, I said to myself, it's my turn. And it's my turn to do something, a project, and it's my turn to be entrepreneurial, but not to make money. And entrepreneurship in the nonprofit sector is something that is often overlooked. I could pick up the phone, I could call anybody, I could get anybody to invest money, so what would I do with the time that I allotted myself? And I decided to take a page out of some work I had done way far back, which was with children in developing countries and how children learn. We believed, long before '82, that the best way to think about thinking was to write computer programs. And to my enormous surprise, computer programming fell off the table. It fell off the table about 30 years ago because people used it to develop apps. And then they sold the apps. And only recently did it start to come back. So when I looked around, I said, what will the market do on its own, and what things does the market not do? And so if you ask me, what do I say to myself every morning when I wake up is, what will normal market forces do? And if I'm doing that, stop. Namely, if normal market forces are going to do something, let them happen. But what are some of the things that markets don't do? And one of the experiences I had, I don't know if I have a slide, whoops, I've lost the control, but I'll use a finger. Or does this, I just plug this in. There we go. Does that sound right? Okay. Okay. So I started, again, this was a nonprofit project in Cambodia, of all places, for reasons that would take far too long to explain, in a village that had no electricity, no water, no nothing. $40 per year was the annual income of those families. Connected them all with laptops, satellite, got it such that when those kids went home at night, the parents loved it because it's the brightest light source in the house. When they opened up their laptops, it illuminated the house. And it was sort of a metaphor and a real experience. And I said, what in that picture will normal market forces not do back in 2001? And see a satellite dish in the back. We knew telecommunications was going to come down in price and extend in reach. There's electricity in the sense that there's a generator. Yeah, electricity will expand and increase in ways around the world. But the thing that bothered me the most was the laptop. And the reason the laptop bothered me, in the sense that normal market forces might not bring the cost way down, is that there was this little nuclear war going on between Intel and Microsoft, in the sense that every time Intel made a faster processor, Microsoft used more of it. And the net to most of us, or almost all of us, was zero. In fact, it takes longer for laptops to start up today and shut down than it ever did before. And it's not because the processor's gotten slower. And so we hear about Moore's law, everybody talks about it, but nobody ever used it in the reverse direction. Nobody said, okay, let's stop whatever laptop and let it every 18 months become half as expensive. Now, you can find a little bit of flaw in that math, but not much. In other words, you could, in fact, go in the other direction. Nobody was. There was no commercial interest in doing it. So I said, I'll start an effort to do that. And I'll build the so-called $100 laptop and raise $30 million to do it, which I raised in 4 days with a couple of phone calls and a few pieces of email. Not because the idea was absolutely, irresistible, but because I knew who to call. It was a nonprofit. They weren't going to make money anyway. But one thing they did is they trusted that I'd get it done. And in all the companies I've funded, I have to tell you, the idea never really mattered. It was only the person. So when you go to sell your companies, people are investing in you. The idea, the idea matters a little bit, but you matter an awful lot more. So when I started this and started one laptop per child, the commitment wasn't to lowering the price of laptops, even though that turned out to be incendiary in terms of people who beat up on me for doing it, but it had to do with education. And where this is going for the next 20 minutes is really 100% about education. I'll show you some pictures that are wonderful to look at, but in the end, the one thing you want to do is to have a 100% literate world. And it's possible for that to happen in a very short period of time. Many people say to me, in India I had this once happen to me and I was astonished. The Minister of Education said to me, only 1 out of 100 children who go to primary school end up going to college. Isn't it a shame I can't figure out which one? I said, what? You can't be serious. That can't possibly be what you want to figure out. Which one of the 100? Have them all 100 of them go to 7th grade and be very grateful, not just figure out which one and really, look at it in that point in terms of the spikes. So what we first did, and it's a hardware company, partly because it didn't exist, not because I want to build hardware, but the hardware didn't exist. And you can say you want to do it, but unless you actually do it, you design it and do it, it's not going to happen. Now, being a nonprofit doesn't mean you're not businesslike. Many of my friends said, oh, Nicholas, start a profit-making company, make lots of money, and then give it away. I'm saying, well, no. If you do that, mission and market get confused. And the other thing that's very, very important is you can make market out of education, but making a mission out of education puts you in a completely different game. In other words, your constituency isn't who buys it. Your constituency is the kids. Almost nobody has the kids as a constituency. Almost nobody. And that was what we decided we'd do. Yes, it had to be $100. Yes, it had to power itself. It had lots of things that, believe me, were a lot of fun to do. It became an ebook. It did all these other things. And being a nonprofit, you can have partners. You could never partner with the UN. You could never partner with certain people. Plus, you don't have to necessarily give shares and equity to people to get really great people. If the mission's interesting enough, you're going to get a lot of people who come for the mission. Now, is that the complete and the widest choice? Not necessarily. But for us, it was quite successful. So what I want to do is not so much show you about the laptop project, which was a lot of fun, 3 million laptops later. Believe me, many scars and many of the same things that go through should we say, the minds and the experience of entrepreneurs. But after doing this and being in lots of places, 40 countries, 25 languages, what did we learn? And what we learned, quite simply, is that the kids were miles ahead of the teachers in almost every single place we went. In one country, Uruguay, which was certainly the most advanced and sophisticated, we had several examples where the kids completely changed the way the teachers taught. One teacher, because it was done at the presidential level, the president of the country announces that every child will get a laptop, and one teacher who heard that had been teaching for 25 years, and she said, I've been teaching for 25 years. What am I going to do with a laptop? So she went and asked for early retirement. Social Security office says, yes, you've earned it, you can have it, but you have to come back in 3 weeks to actually get the final paperwork. And within the 3 weeks, the laptops arrived in her class. And the energy in that classroom was so obvious to her in a very short period of time, like 3 days, she went racing back to the Social Security office to get late retirement. So this sort of thing happened over and over again. The kids really were changing. So I can show you tons of pictures where kids are paired together, where kids teach grandparents and parents, which is perhaps the most heartwarming. We know we did about 1 million laptops in Peru. And by the way, the cost and price of our laptops was the same. There's no margin. And the entire operations of the organization were funded externally by philanthropists. So this was a little bit odd. One isn't trying to compute, how much this costs and how much margin we're going to make on each one. Most heartwarming experience was the kids teaching their parents how to read and write. I mean, I can't even imagine. This girl is going to grow up thinking very differently about learning and sort of being involved in her own destiny. So lots of pictures that are pretty photogenic. This one interests me the most in some sense because this teacher, this is outside of India, outside of Bombay or Mumbai in India, this teacher ran his class in a very sort of strict, the kids were sitting on little white mats, just absolutely still. They didn't want to ask questions because he had like a fly swatter, a little whip. He sort of, corporal punishment was part of the education. And when they got their laptops, this is the way he taught from that point on. So it was, to go back to, this was perhaps one of the most gratifying experiences I had. But what I then asked myself is, what happens when there are no schools? There are about 100 million kids who don't go to school. At least 50 million of them don't go to school because there isn't one. Not because it's a bad one, which arguably sometimes can be worse than no school at all, but at least 50 million kids don't have a school to go to. Now, if you think for a second, that number is a little squishy because when do you stop counting a kid? So if a kid is 5 and doesn't go to school, next year that kid is 6, still doesn't go to school, but now there's another 5-year-old, and then next year that kid's 7, and now there's still another 5-year-old. So when do you stop counting? You stop counting at 10, at 12. So the 50 million is sort of stopping to count at about 6th or 7th grade, but even if it's 40 million or it's 70, it's a sufficiently large number. So here's the experiment, and it truly is an experiment because 1 laptop per child, most people don't know it because we don't publicize this, but in the 6 years that I ran it, the size of the project was $1 billion. So 25 people in Cambridge and people in other countries, that's a large project. It's large by any standard. The experiment was tiny. The experiment was funded by my wife and I. It's tiny. And here was the experiment. Can you take a tablet, instead of a laptop, a tablet, filled with applications, let's say 1,000 of them, and drop that tablet in a closed box in a village so that there's as many tablets as kids, with no instructions and no teacher, and basically leave the box. Now, we got all sorts of clearances to do this ethically and through IRB and all of that, because the tablets were hot in the sense that when you turned on the tablet, as soon as you touched something, it recorded what you touched. It knew how much time, you know, when you opened it, how long it was powered on. It collected all the data. And somebody, a human, went into the village once a week and swapped SIM cards, because it was photographing the kids. It was doing all of this stuff. So we have the data. And I often forget to mention that a solar panel was brought into the village like the day before, and an adult was shown how to use it. So we were able to figure out exactly what happened. And what happened was the following. In about 3 minutes, the first child figured out where the power switch was. That there, first of all, there was something in the box, and then there was a power switch. Now, on-off power, remember, they don't have electricity. They've never seen a cell phone. They've certainly never seen a tablet. So finding the power switch, there was a gentleman here before from Motorola. This is a Motorola tablet, which has a terrible power switch. It's on the back. It's hard to find, and all the rest. 2.5 minutes, they powered on. Within 5 days, they were using 50 apps per child per day. Within 2 weeks, they were reciting ABC songs, or they were singing ABC songs. Here's the part that you won't believe. Within 6 months, they hacked Android. Literally. We had, I think, made a stupid mistake. We had fenced off the camera. We had decided that the camera, we would use it to look at them, and we didn't want, it was sort of a camera, an app protector around the camera. The kids discovered it. This wasn't a matter of going in and tweaking a control bit in the utilities. They actually messed around with the code. We know exactly who did it, what time, what they did, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that's quite extraordinary. And so here's the best picture I've got. Probably the best picture in my whole life. I've never had one this good. It's not maybe the best photography, but it's what's happening is this kid has sort of nominated himself as teacher. He's a little bored looking, but he's nominated. But what's really amazing is the kid at the end, sort of your left, is using the tablet of the kid just closer to me, and then he's here, and so on and so forth. None of them are writing the same apps, and running the same apps, and this is all happening on its own. There's no adult that has set these kids up, just told them they should meet in some place and run this. So I said, wow. First of all, are they reading? And the answer is yes. They can phonetically, some of them, they differ, and some, the girls particularly are better as usual, and the girls are also, the older girls are helping, teach the younger boys. They've got sight words. They're not doing what we call deep reading yet, but it's close enough. Close enough to do what? And this is what I'd like. I've thought about it a lot recently, and you guys are doing it with the X Prize and the sort of Moonlander. I had never before realized that there are a number of ways to raise money. One is to go to venture capitalists, like we just saw, sitting behind the table, who will invest in you, maybe come to me, or to go to bigger VCs and to raise money. That's one way. The other, which I'm much more accustomed to, is to persuade agencies and governments and big-time philanthropists to give it for whatever cause. And here's the cause. It can be scientific, it can be philanthropic. But the one I hadn't thought of and hadn't been involved in was prizes. To give a prize. Now, I don't know, and if I did know the statistics, I couldn't disclose them in that particular case. But prizes, typically, people spend 40 times the amount of money of the prize to win the prize. It's about a 40-to-1 ratio if you take the collective expenditure. It may be higher on the moon landing, I don't know. So what if you see a problem over there, whatever it is, and you want to put $1 billion at that problem? You give a $25 million prize. Now, you don't have control of how it's going to be spent, but it's nonetheless like pointing a laser beam worth $1 billion. And so this is now what I'm doing like this week and the past few weeks, is to take what you see on the screen and turn it into a prize, where the prize isn't defined, so what I'm about to say is certainly going to change, but the prize is, can you build a technology that you can effectively drop out of the sky like a Coke bottle, and it creates literacy? Now, literacy, let's define it more broadly. Literacy isn't just the ability to read. It's not just numeracy. It includes all kinds of elements that, in fact, the ones you can measure are the ones that are least interesting. In fact, people who have dropped out of school in this room dropped out of school because school's boring. And so this is actually, the challenge isn't just for the kids to pass SAT scores. It's a much more profound form of literacy, which has to be defined, but if you can make the prize, that's what I'm doing right now. So I promised to end on time. What I would like to do to come full circle is, for those of you who are entrepreneurs in the room, the only kind of, sorry, I should say, profit-making companies are not the only kind of entrepreneurship. There's lots of other kinds of entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is more than starting a company, is a style of thinking. And if you have that style of thinking, it's about risk-taking. It's about doing almost everything your parents don't want you to do. Okay, it really is. Parents want security, and especially if your parents themselves came from some form of poverty and worked their way through professional life to give you a better life, and then you say, Mom and Dad, I'm going to start a company, or I'm going to go to art school, or I'm going to do some of these things. Parents often say, oh God, what did we do wrong? You know, why aren't you working for IBM or whatever the contemporary equivalent might be? So in your own thinking, remember that entrepreneurship is really a style of thought and is something, if you're young enough, do it. And I don't think you're going to regret it. And somebody said up here, do it with a partner. I couldn't agree more. And there are a few other lines I saw go by which I wished I had written them down because I didn't agree with them. But I'm sure that, you know, those of you in the room who are the entrepreneurial side of the equation will do just fine. And a few failures don't hurt. They're pretty good. And I said before it didn't really matter on the idea. I had a guy come into my office with the most extraordinary idea I'd ever heard. Unbelievable. He was going to build a two-wheeled vehicle where the wheels were beside each other instead of in front of each other. And the machine was going to balance itself. And it was going to, I thought, wow, what a great idea. I've never lost more money in my life. It was the Segway. And so, great ideas sometimes don't work because of the personality as usual. And then one guy came into my office who wanted to start an internet company, who knew nothing about the internet, not the slightest clue. And I brought him to one of the meetings of colleagues of mine, and they laughed him off the stage. They said, "This is pathetic. This guy knows nothing." I invested in him, and he started the biggest ISP in China and is a billionaire many times over and has done very, very well. So you just can't tell, and the idea is only a part of it. And I think I've ended exactly at the time I'm supposed to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. And I know you're very digital, but I still hope that you will read books. And we want to thank you for coming here and to give you a book that was written by Nobel Prize laureate Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Oh. I've heard about it, but don't have it. Yes. Thank you.
And thank you all for coming here and missing out on your Hanukkah candle lighting, and see you soon.
And 3 pictures. Yeah, that's it.